Welcome to Christian Concern Live around the table with Christian Concern this Friday lunchtime. It's great to see you. Do add your comments and questions in the feed if you're watching live today on Facebook or YouTube, and we can see the comments and we will try and respond to them as well. Today we've got Roger Kiska, one of our legal eagles in the legal team today, and Andrea Williams as well from as Chief Executive of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. And we want to start by talking about a very sad case that we've been involved with for about a month now. Case of a man who were only allowed to identify by some anonymous initials, RS. This chap is a Polish citizen, was living in Britain, and very sadly he died this week. Roger, can you talk us through what happened on this?
Sure. First of all, regardless of the initials, RS was a human being. He was a husband and a father. He was a son. He was deeply beloved by his family, who, my colleagues and I worked with them through the holidays, weekends, up all night. His life had tremendous value and meaning. But he, unfortunately, despite being middle-aged, had a heart attack and was without oxygen for 45 minutes. And that happened in November. And a few days thereafter, without giving him much of an opportunity to recover. And he was, he was never going to be fully recovered, but he was recovering. He was slowly going from a vegetative state to a minimally conscious state. And it could have gotten to the point where he could sense other people in the room. He could squeeze hands, to recognize them. So it wasn't as if he was, brain dead in any way. But the hospital took the matter to the Court of Protection, who decided for their own reasons that his life was no longer worth living. And those reasons really were that he couldn't feel pleasure anymore. So, that's how the courts today, the secular courts, define what a life is worth, whether it can feel pleasure or not. And they decided that it was best for him to be dehydrated to the point of death. And that's basically what happened.
So
what a question, actually whether or not his life has value if he feels pleasure, or his life is futile because he is so disabled at this point. It's quite something when the value of life is measured in these terms. And really, how did they know? How could they really know?
Yeah, and it's just the problem with these cases. There's many problems with these cases. First, they're terribly rushed. So those who are trying to defend the life of their loved one have no time to prepare. They've even if they have the means to hire a lawyer, that lawyer is playing catch up because he's got to test all the medical evidence in such a rushed state of affairs. And what ends up happening is you have a one-sided statement of the facts, which is always set up to make it look much worse than it is. Thank God for Christian Legal Center and supporting on a pro bono basis in these cases. Otherwise, these families would have no chance. So it's a stitch up.
It's all done in secret, isn't it, Roger? We can understand that the people don't want their privacy. That these are. You imagine a family is in a really distressed state. They're under shock, and they are being told by a whole group of experts that this is the way a certain case should go. But they believe differently. They believe that his life is worth living. They want to give him every chance.
And they had experts who said his life had more, that his condition wasn't nearly as dire as they were suggesting in the hospital. And you would expect a hospital who wants to remove hydration and nutrition to make it look as bad as possible. And that's why you test evidence. And that really wasn't, that really didn't take part in when the order was given to remove hydration and nutrition.
And I heard, Roger, that is this right, that somebody visited him and then he cried and stuff, so he wasn't like completely unconscious of their presence or anything like that? Is that right?
Yeah, the family is saying, and then they took a video which they introduced in court, which the judge was very upset with. But there is truth and power in videos, and I've seen the video, and he clearly is aware of the presence of other people, And it's not shown in the video, but the family says that he cried upon them entering. So clearly there was something much more there than the Court of Protection in its initial judgment was suggesting. And they should have reopened it up for fresh medical examination. They wouldn't let a Polish doctor come in and re-examine him. It's an unbelievable case in so many ways. Another facet of this, which is important to discuss, is that he was a Polish citizen. That Poland had a constitutional obligation to bring him back home, and they did everything in their power to do so. A district court in Warsaw issued an order saying, we want him back. He was given diplomatic status.
That's
and
a big
Poland,
deal, isn't it? Giving him, doesn't happen every day, that, does it?
No.
Giving someone
no.
diplomatic status. They did that, in order to put pressure on the British courts to say, actually, we have the right to take him home. Is that what they did?
Yeah, I mean, he's got diplomatic immunity, and so the court order shouldn't have been functional anymore. And the Polish authorities alerted the hospital. They alerted the UK authorities that this was the case, and nonetheless, the UK took no steps whatsoever to delay his death. They didn't
was offering
hydrate
to
him.
fly him out to Poland, airlift him out, and look after him, for however long it takes, for a much longer
I
period.
just want to think about the kind of difference between a pro-life nation, which Poland is,
Mm,
in its culture,
mm,
and in its laws and in its people.
mm.
This story was headline news. It was in all the major news bulletins
In Poland.
in
Yes.
Poland.
Yeah.
In our nation, blanket a blackout, basically blanket blackout. You
Yeah.
cannot. You must do nothing to identify this man, his condition, where he's being treated. So we were prohibited from saying anything at all around this.
Right.
In Poland, they were talking about this case and they
Right.
were wanting to bring him home. In this country, the court was saying, this was an unbelievable statement. And Roger was, along with Pavel in the Christian Legal Center and with lawyers that we had instructed, was really working very much very close to this case. But I might not have the exact words, Roger, but it was that the hospital was concerned that if RS were moved to Poland, that he would be stressed by the journey. Now somebody needs to I need to try and get my head around that.
So let's just think, that's a good point, Andrea, isn't it? Because it's in his best interest to die because he can't feel or experience anything. But then actually the journey would be too stressful for him. How do you reckon those two things? How do those two things fit together in somebody's mind? Do they fit together? If he can experience stress, he can surely experience happiness as well. I mean, it's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Well, and for me, the other real point is here that Poland was offering him a chance at life. His mother was saying, who's a doctor, medical, was saying, I will have him at home. I will try. I'm prepared to do all it takes to look after him. Remember, this is not about extending futile medical intervention. This is about giving a man food and hydration, nutrition and hydration.
Yeah.
This is not about over-invasive, this is actually about removing life, things that you would give any human being: water, hydration, food at the end of their life. And also by agreement, there was it was agreed in the medical evidence I believe, Roger, that this man, the prognosis was that he could well live for 5 years. I mean,
10 years. 10 years.
5 or 10 years.
And he was living off of ventilators, so I mean, he could live without ventilators.
And here's another point: if it's too stressful to be transported, how stressful is it to be dehydrated and starved to death? Right? If it's stressful to be transported, surely it's more stressful to be dehydrated and starved to death than to be transported. Surely.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd, because Parliament has many times said we will not have euthanasia in this country, and somehow we've made this semantic distinction by saying, well, if he dehydrates to death, that's not euthanasia. So euthanasia, first of all, would be quick rather than having the inhumane and degrading process of starving and dehydrating to death. But it is euthanasia. And let me explain. If I have an infant in my care who, can't feed themselves because they're an infant on their own, and I decide it's a bleak world and it's not worth living, so I'm not gonna feed this child, and I'm gonna prevent other people from feeding this child, which is what, in essence, was done here. They prevented others from feeding RS, and that child dies. I am gonna go to jail for murder. Yet just because someone sits on a bench and has a state sanction to do so, we don't call it murder or euthanasia. And I think we really need to re-examine the logic and the semantics of this, because it's wrong.
Really, there needs to be a wholesale inquiry into the court protection, how these cases are run. I mean, this has been going on since the landmark case of Tony Bland, but we need to really look at this. We had the whole Liverpool.
Well, why is it? Why is it the courts are able to sort of protect the identity or whatever, or prohibit people from sharing the identity of this person? How does that work? In a free and open country, why is it secret?
I mean, they have to weigh the public interest of the story versus the privacy of the family, and to protect the hospital as well from disrepute and possible interventions. I mean, that's the basis, but the extent of this particular reporting ban was draconian. And that's the thing. Just the Tony Bland case. What that said was you have a right to withdraw treatment or refuse treatment. What is happening in these cases today is wholly different, because you are now saying, with the added step, that we are going to prevent you from giving treatment. And we're going to even keep one of your citizens, if it's not a UK citizen, from receiving treatment in their home country. So this is an epic leap forward as far as jurisprudence goes.
And let me just also say about this and our involvement in it. And I can say this, it feels, I can't imagine what it's like for the family, but it feels oppressive. Everywhere you turn, you're really doing all that you can to seek justice for this man, because there's an ambulance waiting, and there's care waiting, and there's water and high nutrition waiting. And we actually were doing things like getting the water reinstated, weren't we, Roger?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. It would be removed, and then because of the Polish intervention, or because of another court hearing, all in secret, and because we'd appealed the order where it was going to be withdrawn because of another intervention by Poland, over and over again, we were able to keep the water going, to keep the hydration going. But it was a battle, and it was oppressive, and it was overwhelming. Also, we retained at the Christian Legal Centre specialist lawyers in this matter. And this has cost us tens of thousands of pounds. And so I want to thank our supporters out there. I want to thank people that keep us going by faith, that sustain this organisation as we seek to contend for life, no matter what the cost, as we seek to do the right thing this day, today, in order to speak life, in order to speak truth, in order to try and do the best, trusting that God will see us through. And there was a sense in which no normal person in a desperate situation, who's confused, who's shocked, is going to be able to find the lawyers, find the fees, do what it takes to walk this path. And what the system just expects everyone to keel over, not to fight back. And with this case, and indeed with the Alfie Evans case, sort of different, a similar but different case, we got into the mix and started fighting back, contending for life. But it's a hair-raising business. It requires an innate belief in what you're doing, a need to dig very deep, a need to work at all hours of the day, and a need to find money. And just imagine if there wasn't the Christian Legal Centre. Well, most people find themselves without the Christian Legal Centre. And
well, this family have exhausted their own money supply, haven't they, by savings by already in trying to challenge this.
Before they came to us, they'd spent their life savings. The mum and the sisters spent their life savings using expensive lawyers. And that was a point at which at this point, the expert evidence, the hospital's evidence had been conceded. And so when you have a statement of fact conceding that it's in essence, it's right to withdraw the hydration and nutrition, if you concede that point, which had happened for the family without them really realizing, then we were basically fighting an uphill battle all the way after that. And to try and get experts in was incredibly difficult. Roger?
Yeah, I mean, this is another sad reality of these cases is that they're rushed, and that single judge with his initial findings, that becomes an insurmountable obstacle, because when it goes to the Court of Appeals, they're not looking at fact unless the fact is clearly erroneous. So that facts that single judge has found stay throughout. And I mean, we tried desperately to introduce new evidence and new experts, and it wasn't allowed, despite the fact that he was seemingly recovering. So this is another hurdle that I think procedure shouldn't be killing people. We should have enough.
Where does the law? What's the status of the law when another country like Poland gives him diplomatic status, goes to that length, giving him diplomatic status and offering to fly him for treatment? What's the status of the law then? Why couldn't that happen?
Yeah. Our legal opinion was that the district court ruling in Warsaw superseded the Court of Protection ruling here, and that B, he had diplomatic immunity and should have been allowed to fly. Now, that was our opinion. Whether the UK had a different opinion or not, that should have been worked out in the courts, and he should have been kept alive. So the moment that Poland told the hospital and the UK government that this is the state of affairs, he should have been put back on normal hydration and food. So Andrea's correct that he was getting hydration, but it was a minimal amount of hydration, which only slowed his death. It wasn't enough to keep him alive.
And also, the hydration was coupled with really heavy sedatives. And so what you would then end up with is the body just not being able to cope with that. It slows him down entirely. Wow. It's so that the kind of the sedation becomes so heavy.
Right. And will we one day, Roger, know his name? Will we one day be able to release his name? Will that come out, or what's expected on that?
Usually these reporting orders have an expiry date, which is often several months after the fact, once the public interest has died down. So that will almost certainly be the case.
In a few months, right? In some
well,
months.
we are certainly advising the family that this is something that they should apply for. They should apply for this sooner rather than later. And also, and Roger will vouch for this. This family is a beautiful family. And they need to tell their story, and they really need to, and there are a number of these stories that we know about, that people need to tell their stories, because this culture of, I'm going to call it a culture of death, but also a culture of secrecy. You've got to shine a light for justice to be done. These things are very complicated. I'm not saying that they're not complicated. But for justice to be done, for right decisions to be made, things can't become a closed shop with the same old lawyers on the expensive rates and the same experts and the same official solicitor, all of these same people in the same room, making the same decisions behind closed doors that no one can report on, that no one can penetrate. This has to be broken open. And to be honest, it's the same we have similar situations with family cases. Again, we understand why there needs to be sensitivity around how open these courts are or how much is reported. However, there are cases that need to come to light where parents have been dealt great injustices, and they need to tell their stories around children. It's the same sort of thing, right, with regard to children being taken away. When courts operating in secret and with no way of breaking through is not it's not great for justice.
There's no equality of arms. The fact that public funds, your taxpayer money, are going to pay for the best lawyers to put people like RS to dehydrate them to death, whereas the families paying these taxes have to still put up their own money to hire lawyers. It's a sad state of affairs. There's no equality of arms whatsoever.
Wow. And how many cases like this do you think there are, Roger?
It's difficult to say because of the privacy of the courts, and the vast majority of families aren't as open to fighting and going on social media as the families of families like RS and those of Alfie Evans and Charlie Gard. So there's many more that we never hear about.
Wow. Yeah, I can see Lilyfield on Facebook said there are people literally without limbs who live meaningful lives. It's a tragedy the courts can decide if your life is worth living. Soon they want to euthanize people with disabilities, as according to them, they can't experience pleasure. Yes, Lily. I mean, totally agree with you on that. It's that this is not a good definition of whether a life is worth living, is it? Whether you can experience pleasure or not, because who determines that? It seems very, very subjective.
Do you remember the case last year of the couple who were the father was a medical consultant and his daughter was very unwell, and he'd been told that they were going to remove treatment, and he said no, that shouldn't be happening. It may be great to put this in the stream and even to play it and even to remind people today of that incredible story that we were involved with last summer when the hospital called the police and the father was dragged away and had a heart attack in being dragged away from the bedside of his daughter, where he'd just been told she was where they were going to just withdraw treatment.
That's the Abbasi case. That's the Abbasi, isn't it? Yeah.
The Abbasi case, yes.
Yeah.
Where the police officer used a metal spike to remove his hand from his daughter's hand. Yeah.
I mean, this.
Let me ask you a question here, Michelle.
I just want to say that one, Tim. I just want to say on that one.
Yeah.
If we just spoken about it a little bit like we're speaking about RS, it would have sounded terrible. But I don't think it penetrates like really seeing it.
Yes, I agree.
And that's why it would be good to remind ourselves of that footage. And similarly with RS, the pictures of him that we weren't able to show.
Still not allowed to show.
But they make it real, you see.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't believe, you'd have never believed that a hospital or police could behave like they did in the Abbasi case. It's simply not something we think could happen. It shouldn't happen in civilized society, but it did. And I'm not saying these things are routine, but they happen. And
there's a question here. Let me just take this question from Michelle Fillingham on Facebook. He was a European citizen, so was it because of Brexit that the law was against him? Did Brexit make a difference in this, Roger?
No, it didn't. There's international laws about diplomatic immunity. There are conventions about recognizing foreign judgments. This had nothing to do with EU law or Brexit. It was just general and very basic international law that the UK knew very well and didn't act on. Okay.
And what can be done then to stop this sort of thing happening again? What can we do? What can we do to stop this happening again? I mean, it seems like an abuse of power of the courts almost.
Well, we have to keep on fighting. So please stand with us in every way. Please keep on praying. Please give to us, please, so that we can fight these cases. Please come alongside us. Please tell the stories. Bring us more cases. Although, capacity, we need to grow. We need to break open the silence. So there needs to be a campaign around this. We need to keep on shining the light into the darkness, and there needs to be a movement on it. but it's tricky.
We're expecting pressure in Parliament as well, aren't we, on euthanasia more generally? I think there's a Scottish private bill that's coming into the Scottish Parliament, and I think there's a campaign to try and bring a euthanasia bill. So we're expecting this to become another battleground again, sometime maybe even this year, for liberalising the law as it stands, which is good and strong and right, and has been upheld several times. But there's pressure to try and change it and allow euthanasia, and that would, take us further down this whole route of a culture of death, wouldn't it, Andrea?
Indeed, and I think, Roger, you have seen, as someone who has worked extensively in European level, you've seen what happens in nations where euthanasia becomes legalized.
Yeah, it just completely gets deregulated. So that doctors who are initially subject to strict procedures bypass those procedures and put different causes of death. In Switzerland, within 10 years, the number of those, and this was of Swiss citizens, not even the foreigners coming, there was a 700% increase in the number of people getting euthanized or getting assisted suicide. In the Netherlands, you saw similar numbers. You saw it going from severely disabled to children, to just being depressed. So the grounds for euthanasia expand. So it's just saying that life has no value. It's demonic in a sense how far these laws go, and how culture of death is a great word for it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's keep praying about that. Let's keep taking action on that. Let's keep very alert on that, as indeed.
Can I just move, and keep very alert? But what I want to say is this kind of, as well, is this just with regard to that, during this COVID time, and there's been a huge shift. There's been obviously the kind of government COVID strategy has been around protecting people from dying because of the COVID virus. We bear in mind that the average age of someone that dies is 81. And so on, and that stat may have changed a bit with an underlying health condition. Currently, I'm with my my parents-in-law who are in their 80s, and as we get older, obviously we get more we get vulnerable and more frail, and in need of care. In a civilized society, and how we look after those that are frail and elderly is, it's a mark of how civilized we are. And I think it's where we as the church, generally with our doors flung open, say to the elderly, your life is of value. We say there is something beyond this, our own mortality, that there's an eternity of to look forward to through Jesus Christ. This is the message of hope that the church has in these times, this kind of absolute innate dignity of those that are fragile. And I think some of this kind of elder abuse that we're seeing, the loneliness that we're seeing, some of the conditions in care homes, the abandonment of the elderly. I know we've just talked about a campaign around, this hydration and nutrition, but let us think about, as we grow up, as we are a society that is aging and living longer, I mean, how do we view the elderly? How do we watch over them,
Well, and Andrea, you mentioned COVID strategy, and of course one of the most shocking things about that was during lockdown allowing people to travel to a suicide clinic, because it wasn't it, allowing people to travel for assisted suicide. That's one good reason when you're allowed to travel. You have all these other things. You're not allowed to travel for anything apart from specific reasons, and one reason you're allowed to travel is for suicide, and that is effectively legalizing euthanasia by default, isn't it? In a kind of way, that the government did there.
Well, what madness, what crazy logic that Matt Hancock would shut down the country, order us all not to travel, keep us in our homes, but say you can travel to kill yourself. That is crazy logic. We're keeping you all at home in order so that you don't die. But if you want to die, you can travel to die. I mean,
yes,
to kill yourself. So
and that was, as Ben Jones pointing out to us back in November. So you couldn't go to church either, right? You know, you couldn't go to church, but you could go to commit suicide. I mean, how, you know, it's so perverse, isn't it? Yeah, you couldn't go to church, but you could go to commit suicide. And of course, yeah, that brings us into there is some new in terms of we're very, very grateful and pleased that the English and Welsh churches are now allowed to open.
Indeed, and I would hope that
our
they
legal
would...
action, where we wanted to seek judicial review on behalf of various churches in England and Wales, and that church action, that legal action, has now been withdrawn because churches are now open and effectively the point has been made. There, do you want to comment on that at all, Andrea, or Roger even?
Roger?
Yeah, and I think I mean, first of all, it's a great decision, and I hope it was done in recognition of the fact that churches are autonomous and essential, that churches should be allowed to govern their own internal affairs and do what is wise and, you know, for their own congregants. You know, it's troubling. We were greatly troubled because you could go take your dry cleaning out. You can go to an off license. You could do all sorts of things, but you couldn't go to church. At a time when people were struggling for fellowship, they were lonely, they were depressed, they were suffering from addictions. Just the isolation was crippling, and it continues to be. And church, you know, in all of those contexts, is essential. And that should be a campaign in itself, recognition of how essential church is.
Yeah. So, and where we're left with now is, although England and Wales, you are allowed to go to church, and that's great, and churches are, you know, with COVID compliance, you know, social distancing, etc., are open in some places. In Scotland, it's actually, they've criminalised it again. It's illegal to open your church or to go to church as of today. As of this coming Sunday, it will be illegal to go to church. And we've gathered a group of Scottish ministers to challenge that as well, haven't we, Andrea? And we know that they've sent a pre-action letter.
Absolutely.
And we expect that may well end up with a judicial review as well. So watch this space on that one, because we do think this is a very important principle of allowing churches to open and treating church ministry as essential. And actually, on that point, I wrote an article which I think went up yesterday about lessons from churches in the plagues. I was just very struck because in the Great Plague of London, and let's remember that killed 25% of the population of London. I mean, imagine that, 25% of your church, 25% of your school. You know, 100,000 deaths today is a tragedy, but it's 0.2%. So by comparison, it's virtually nothing. And although a lot of the rich and wealthy, including Anglican ministers, ran away from London, bold Puritans who went in, opened the churches up. It said that no church that was open was empty; they were all full, and they risked their lives and pray and minister and offer food and water and sustenance and prayer and the life of the gospel in those circumstances. The people who are brave and courageous and faith-filled and sacrificially gave to minister the life of the gospel in a time of death. And it just feels too much like the church is cowering away in our culture today relative to the boldness that we've seen in much higher risk situations in church history, I think.
Tim, your article really stirred me because it challenged me so deeply. I want to be out on the front lines. I mean, I think we are at Christian Concern out on the front lines, but I want to fling open the doors. I want to, where is the hope of Christ ringing out in the public space? And do people know the joy and the comfort and the hope and the life that can be found in him? Is that something that is in the noise in our streets? Is it in the noise of our churches? I want to see the churches flung open wide. I want to see them in every village open wide, you know, not looking like they're in fear. But I'd love, what would it be to see people flocking in to be ministered to, for their souls to be ministered to with the gospel that is eternal? You know, what a hope, what a joy. We live in a kind of perpetual terror. We live terrorized of death. When the hope of the gospel is life and peace and joy and understanding Jesus Christ, that God holds our every day in his hands and that no coronavirus can take us. Well, of course, that doesn't mean to be reckless, to respect that we have a virus, but it means that there is a hope eternal. It means that we can minister to the lost and the lonely and the broken and the depressed. It means something so much more than anything this world can give. Or any route out of lockdown. It's the route to eternity. Amen. So this is a moment. If ever there were a moment in the face of death, that the gospel needs to ring clear. And I kind of think that if the Puritans were around right today, we'd be hearing from them.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, Andrea Williams, where are you? Tim Dieppe, Roger, what are we doing?
Yeah, no, well, it's always good to be inspired by church history, and then also to think, well, how will the church history or historians look back on us, and are we living the faith-filled, courageous lives that actually the gospel calls us to live, or are we carrying away, terrified by the news and the media? And so on. I mean, that's the question, isn't it? And I'm challenged as well as I read that stuff and think about it. But I want to move on for the last few minutes because we've got a very important case next week, haven't we? Coming up, case of Shea Amuba, who's an actor who was cast in a lead role in a West End musical, or a top musical, The Colour Purple, is it? And then some offence archaeologist went and dug up a post from 2014 where she'd objected to same-sex marriage, and she was.
Let's just be clear that this was another West End actor. He was acting in Hamilton. His name is Aaron Lee Lambert. He's an LGBTQI activist.
Yeah.
And when she got the lead role in The Colour Purple, he dug deep into her social media posts and found a post supporting marriage, and then essentially created a campaign against her as someone for believing that she is homophobic and she should not play the role of Celie in The Colour Purple. So he created a social media campaign to remove her from her leading role.
Yeah. Deliberately went and dug it up. So this is in the Employment Tribunal next week. It's quite an important case. There'll be witnesses on both sides. You can apply to watch it live. We hope to be reporting on it live as well, on social media and things as well. It's a really important case for free speech. Should someone be dropped because of something they said on Facebook some years before? And actually what she said was in support of biblical marriage between a man and a woman. Should that affect your career belief and expressing the belief that a man and a woman, marriage is between a man and a woman? So it's a very big case, a very significant case, will probably last all week, maybe into the following week as well. So please do be praying for that, watching out for updates on it as well, and following it. And we will keep you updated on it. But it's a very significant case next week.
If people want to watch it, they can actually. They can tune in. They can. We can put details about that. And I think it would be really great if on the stream here we could just link to the video of Shea that she made when the case was first launched. Of course, the theatres are all closed at the moment, but it's very striking that for a young woman who got an agent straight away and was never out of work in the acting profession and was taking, lead roles in West End productions, to have found herself dumped by the agency, dumped by the theatre world, unable to get a job ever since, is pretty stark stuff. Yeah.
Great. Well, if you want to be kept in touch, there's no better way than to sign up for our emails at christianconcern.com/hello. And you can then sign up for our emails for free and get weekly updates and so on from that. And obviously follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and various other mediums. And we'll see you again on the live stream, same time, same place next week. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great weekend.